400 years after the nobleman Kain was cursed to walk the night as a vampire, and centuries before Kain would rule the wasteland of Nosgoth with his lieutenant Raziel.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
Time travel is a notoriously difficult genre of science fiction to write for. The best time travel movies tend to brush over a lot of the messy concepts around altering history and quickly establish their own rules on how time travel works to give the piece some coherence for as long as the movie actually sticks to its own premise. Then there are others where, well...
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too.
Yes.
Both of these approaches are fine, and often a blend of the two is needed to create an engaging story without getting bogged down in plot holes and nonsensical Hail Marys. The Legacy of Kain series has always been very consistent in its time travel laws, taking a deterministic approach to time as a force in the universe. Its mantra of time abhors a paradox has allowed the writing staff to create meaningful twists and dramatic moments, rather than trying to be overly clever, while also contributing to the oppressive nature of destiny. The constant struggle to change time is often met with the realization that you can only really postpone the inevitable. This puts Blood Omen 2 into a very special part of the Legacy of Kain timeline. Set before the events of Soul Reaver 1, the story follows a now heavily altered timeline created by, spoilers, Kain saving Raziel from being taken into the Soul Reaver at the end of Soul Reaver 2. Right after the fall of the Pillars, Kain, now the commander of a vampire army just like before, wages war against humanity. This time, however, with the leadership of the Sarafin Lord, the humans mount a much stronger defense and Kain is defeated in battle and presumed dead. Awakening 200 years later, the world is a very different place than we saw under Kain's empire, with humanity advancing technologically due to the advent of glyph technology, a kind of magical electricity, which also seems to be very effective at harming vampires. So the game takes place in the altered memories of Kain after the conclusion of Soul Reaver 2, and does a decent job of presenting a fun, slightly more complex what-if kind of scenario that actually ends up becoming canon. So, with a slightly superfluous but competently told scenario, and the ability to finally take the reins as Kain again, why does the game receive so much hatred, being seen as hands down the worst in the series? Well, you can thank some of the developers' bewildering design choices for that. This game could have been a slight clone of Soul Reaver with different abilities for Kain to give him a distinctive feeling over Raziel. Instead, they decided to jump the shark right over the proverbial Rubicon and make the game a complete jank fest. This is the first game in the series that felt like a true chore to play, where the narrative payoff that you receive at the end of each chapter doesn't feel like it justifies what the devs just put you through. If you're thinking of playing the series, then I can safely say you can skip this one. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that compile all the cutscenes down into a watchable movie, so you can get the gist of what happens and move swiftly on to the far superior Defiance. But that wouldn't make much of a video for you all, would it? So, welcome to the Steam Pilgrimage. I am your host, Irate Orange Internet Man, and today we're discussing the bump in the road that is Blood Omen 2. If you like this video, maybe consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to see the rest of the videos dedicated to the Legacy of Kain games, you can check out the channel below and subscribe for the final installment. Also, in the run-up to the final game in the series, I've decided to start a Discord channel. I know most of you watching this probably love to talk lore and share theories, so if you go to the link below, there's a dedicated Legacy of Kain channel. I'll see you there for all the spectral speculation.
Vorador, the reformed pseudo-hedonist of Termagant Forest. I had met him once before in his new role of patriarch. I still knew not to trust him.
The Legacy of Kain games are a lot of things to a lot of people, but no one would put them in the same category as a game like Ninja Gaiden or Dark Souls. One thing I didn't realize until replaying this game, however, is the similarities it has to a game series that has become a little bit cliche to compare games to. At least not in terms of its moment-to-moment gameplay. The combat has always been used as a quick skill challenge to test you before moving on to the rest of the puzzle, or feeding you the next delicious drop of narrative vitae. Soul Reaver made this clear by having the boss fights act more like puzzles to be solved rather than being a mastery over the game's mechanics, and Soul Reaver 2 reinforced this by removing boss fights entirely. And no, I don't count the final encounters with the Sarafan, as you're basically immortal. With Blood Omen 2, the devs decided to take a different approach, obviously wanting to reproduce the feeling from the original Blood Omen of being a powerful, otherworldly being cutting a bloody swath through his enemies. And then they gave him tank controls. Okay, I want to preface this by saying that I played this on PC using a rewasd or re-WASD setup that the creators seemed to think was the optimal way to play, so you can take from that what you will. Now with that out of the way, this game is fucking janky. It goes beyond a mild annoyance into rage-quitting territory. We thought the only dark gift Raziel got were his wings, but apparently Kain was also jealous of his ability to just turn around quickly. I think, and this is me giving the Mother Teresa of charitable takes here, they wanted to make Kain feel more imposing and powerful than the quick, slinky frame of Raziel. Instead, what they've done is turn him into a plank of wood with slightly less motor skills. You can now only move back and forth in the direction you're facing, and left and right movement only cause you to pivot. This is bad enough during platforming sections, although there's never usually a rush during these scenarios, meaning that you can take the time to line yourself up. The clunk only really becomes a problem during combat with more than one person. The lock-on system returns and it's somehow worse than ever. The new urban setting of the game means that there's often civilians walking around near the enemies that you need to kill to move on. But for some reason, the strafe button is the same as the change targets button, meaning that while you're trying to position yourself, you'll often instead switch to a non-threat NPC, an enemy much further away, sometimes even dead bodies. This is frustrating but manageable with one enemy, but any increase to that number just breaks the entire combat system. Enemies will often try to surround you, which is good in terms of AI, but given that you have to be locked on and facing an enemy to block their attacks, means that there's no really effective way to fight enemies that are more than 45 degrees away from the one that you're currently engaging. You have to keep enemy positions controlled by side dodging, which again, often wrongly registers my inputs and instead changes targets. This means that there's no real progression to fights, and every enemy has the exact same fucking moveset. A combo with a strong attack at the end, and a combo with an unblockable attack at the end. Eventually you end up employing the same strategy for every fight. You move and block until your rage meter fills up, and then you do your own unblockable move, occasionally getting a hit in if you manage to dodge one of the stronger attacks. The most egregious part about the system, the real piss-boiling part though, is that the devs seem to know how bad it was because you're never asked to fight more than 2 enemies at a time. There's a couple of instances where you'll be presented with more than 2, but there's always an opportunity to take out a few of them first using the game's stealth system. And yes, the game has a stealth system. And yes, it sucks. You can only activate the stealth mode, and you know it's going to be a good stealth system when it has a stealth mode, by taking the form of mist when there's mist around for you to blend in with. This leads to some, I want to say hilarious, situations where you'll just find a random patch of mist in the middle of a corridor, like, I wonder what I'm supposed to do here. You can also use the jump ability to hit one enemy, doing about 1 full combo's worth of damage to them before the fight starts, but you can't skip the animation for this, and you often end up getting hit by his Seraphim buddies while you still have no control over Kain. Now that the combat is essentially a requirement that can't really be avoided, the devs decided to implement the lore system, which is a fancy way of saying vampire drink more blood, make more strong. Basically, if you drink blood while you're already at full health, this purple bar will fill up, and when it reaches the top, your max health increases. Now, I don't really have a problem with that idea. It's actually a nice reward for engaging with the combat system, and it gives you a reason to slaughter the innocents in the streets. Sorry, another reason, you twisted fuck. Lowly civilians only have a few drops to lend you and are good for a quick snack to refill your health, but the real prize are the beefier enemies later on in the game. The problem is that the animation to drink takes forever and you're vulnerable while it's happening. The amount of health or lore you replenish is tied to how long the animation takes to resolve, with some enemies taking a full 5 seconds to exsanguinate completely. And you're going to be doing this a lot. Speaking of slow, painful deaths involving having your life essence drained from you, let's talk about the puzzles in this game. The vast majority involve directing the flow of the green glyph energy from one conduit to another to open doors and lower platforms. It's pretty standard stuff. The complexity of the puzzles themselves never really go beyond follow the pipe and press the button, but the devs decided that this magical energy is some kind of a sludge, as it takes so long for it to move along the pipe. There's only one puzzle in the game that really requires you to change the direction on the fly, so I don't know why it takes so long on all the circuits in the game. Everything in this game just feels like padding, from the animations to the unnecessary micro-waiting. It feels like it was put there to make the game last for around 10 hours. And considering the cutscenes alone in the game make up about an hour and a half, that's not a good sign. The one praise I have for the game are the boss fights. Actually no, I have like 1.5, because the first piece of praise I want to give it is this pretty cool reference to the first Blood Omen game.
Please, help
Somebody
me,
help me,
kind sir.
Help me! Help!
Please, help me, kind sir.
Somebody help me, please!
And the boss fights are like at least half as cool as that. When Kain awakens from his torpor, he finds that a number of his most powerful vampire lieutenants have defected to the Sarafan. These vampires have developed new dark gifts over the years, and by killing them, Kain can absorb their powers for his own use. The method of killing these bosses changes from fight to fight, usually with some kind of a catch or a knack to beating them. I actually think these fights still leaned too heavily into using the game's fighting mechanics, but ultimately you'd still have to move your character, I guess, so there's really no way of getting around the problem entirely. In terms of the presentation for the game, the aesthetics and the visuals are kind of all over the place. The industrial style of Meridian City is a nice change and really sells the kind of police state tyranny that the world seems to be living under. The graphics themselves, however, are such a step back, I have to wonder if this game was originally planned as a PS1 sequel to Blood Omen. Kain looks alright, not as flat as he did in Soul Reaver 1, but a definite downgrade from Soul Reaver 2. The supporting cast just look off, however. The vampire who finds Kain, Uma, has these weird circles that are so unrefined I have no idea if it's supposed to be tattoos or hair. And Vorador has lost all of his wizened features, and he now just looks like a lizard had sex with Nosferatu. And don't even get me started on the humans. I'm pretty sure the vampires and the Sarafan should get together and stop the very obvious body snatcher invasion that's currently turning everyone into these creepy bug-eyed replicants. Seriously, the shifting mechanics from Soul Reaver 1 were a fucking technical marvel at the time. How did you go from that to this? And then we have the true disgrace, the final shit-covered nail in the coffin. The voice acting here is so amateurish and flat, like, have these people played the other games in the series? Simon Templeman carries this game, and even then, the dialogue that they give him is so generic. Everything that comes out of his mouth is just, wah, I used to be top vampire. Tell me where to go to kill Badman. His usual contemplative musings are almost non-existent here. If nothing else, this game could have been a really interesting character study into what made Kain who he is, and maybe given us an insight into how he would eventually become the vampire that we see in Defiance. Instead, Kain is a bland character who doesn't actually affect the plot in any way, and not in the slave to destiny kind of way that the games like to toy with, just a completely ineffectual kind of way. He's always doing someone else's bidding, even if, I suppose, it's for his own gains. The other games in the Legacy of Kain series often made you ask questions about what was happening, who's behind this grand scheme, and how the characters are going to solve this seemingly insurmountable problem. The only question that Blood Omen 2 makes you ask is why? Why did they turn Kain into an M4 Sherman? Why does everyone look like that? Why doesn't Kain autoface people when he's blocked? Why did Kain go to war in a gimp suit but undercover in a full suit of armor? Why is Kain so emo? Why does no one point out that the Sarafan Lord clearly isn't human? And the biggest question of them all, why couldn't these plot details been revealed in a more eloquent way through dialogue in Defiance? Let's move on to plot.
When you have destroyed him, you can continue your ascent to power, restore your army, and rule the land at last. Does the lust for vengeance and power no longer stir you?
As mentioned before, Blood Omen 2 takes place in an altered timeline where Kain still destroyed the pillars due to his refusal to sacrifice himself. However, this time the humans managed to all but destroy the invading vampire army, with Kain being struck down and losing the Soul Reaver blade. Awakening to a world now under tyrannical control by the Sarafan Order, although still not quite as bad as the town that I live in because people are actually allowed to go out at night. Kain finds a group of vampire resistance fighters led by none other than Vorador, who seems to be the one siring all of the fledglings for Kain's army. Just a quick nitpick here, they obviously brought Vorador back to sort of set up a mystery that would later go on to be answered, but the reason that he's alive actually got cut from Defiance, and then obviously there was never another sequel, so canonically there's no explanation for why he's currently alive. The Cabal recruit a bishop by offering him the Dark Gifts, and they find out the location of the currently kidnapped Uma, who in turn has information about the Nexus Stone, a magical device that can repel the power of the Soul Reaver, and is probably the reason why Kain was defeated. Kain heads out to find the stone and is confronted by one of his old lieutenants who had betrayed him, Sebastian. In his dying breath, Sebastian tells Kain of an ancient device that the Sarafan plan to use, and Kain sets out to find an entity known as the Seer. Taking the form of a creature like nothing Kain had ever seen, the Seer gives Kain the power to enter the device before the Sarafan show up. The Seer, seemingly sacrificing herself, teleports Kain to the device where he meets the Beast. The Beast seems to be powering the device itself, but more importantly, also seems to know Kain. At the Beast's behest, Kain sets out to the Eternal Prison, which is hands down probably the coolest place in this entire game, and I really wish that it was more explored in the other games. Here, souls are tortured for nearly all of eternity until they've paid for their sins. Kain finds the Builder, a member of the Hilden race and creator of the device. And finally, the main plot is revealed. The Hilden were a race trapped in the demon realm, an alternative dimension behind the pillars, but due to the paradox in Soul Reaver 2, managed to escape as the pillars fell. There is another creature known as the Mass, which has the ability to kill any living creature with a thought, and the Hilden plan to use this device to wipe out all non-Hilden life in Nosgoth by attuning the Mass to Hilden DNA, thereby protecting them. However, if exposed to Hilden blood, the device will become useless. In a rare act of compassion, Kain kills the Builder, putting him out of his misery, and absorbs his essence, before travelling into the device. Back in the Beast's chamber, it's revealed that the Beast was actually Janos Audron, who joins Kain and the rebels. This is where the timelines get a little muddy, and if you're not a fan of circular loops in stories, this one may annoy you, but I won't spoil that until the final video. Janos tells Kain if they can destroy the Hilden Gate, which the Hilden used to escape the Demon Realm, all of the Hilden in Nosgoth will be destroyed. Uma betrays you to introduce a contrived emotional moment, and Kain manages to lower the shield protecting the Hilden city, allowing Janos and Vorador to teleport in before promptly getting their asses handed to them by the Sarafan Lord. Kain and the Sarafan Lord fight, with Kain not being able to defeat the might of the Sarafan Lord, and the Sarafan Lord not being able to destroy Kain because of the protection that the Nexus Stone gave him from the Reaver. Kain decides to risk his life by casting the stone into the gate, breaking the Hilden connection to Nosgoth and destroying them all, and weakening the Sarafan Lord at the same time. In the ensuing struggle with Kain now on the back foot, Janos intervenes, being cast into the Demon Realm himself, but allowing Kain to retrieve the Soul Reaver. Finally back at full strength and with a vengeance, Kain defeats the Sarafan Lord and locks away the Hilden once more, before contemplating the rise of his empire and tying back into the main story. Even a rock this big can't fully divert the flow of time, it seems. And so ends this little vignette in the Legacy of Kain series. An interesting look at the time between Kain's initial rise and his eventual empire, while also twisting the timeline to show some unexpected occurrences. The game also reveals the identity of one of the main antagonists and acts as the closest thing we're going to get to an ending in this series. And I know you're probably thinking that's a strange thing to say, but it will all become clear when we discuss the sequel. As its own self-contained story, the plot of this game is okay, but ultimately it devolves into a number of MacGuffin chases. The bad guys' plans are pretty much all set in motion from the beginning of the game, and Kain just kind of uncovers and dismantles them one by one. The trademark twists the series is known for never really manifest, apart from Uma's betrayal, but again, this seems so tacked on that it lost the clearly intended emotional weight. The big reveal here is that the race that the ancient vampires locked away behind the pillars are the Hilden, which Kain alluded to at the end of Soul Reaver 2. Strange then that their threat is kind of neatly wrapped up by the end of this game. I understand that Kain probably wanted to avoid these events happening, but ultimately he would have known that he'd pretty much already solved the problem in his own past. The one mystery I do like, and truly didn't expect my first time playing through the game, is the fate of Janos Audron. In the timeline, this game is set after we last saw him in Soul Reaver 2, which raises questions about how he survived, did Raziel manage to revive him, and how did he end up in the situation that he finds himself in. We also witness his eventual end, and this lends a sadness to the rest of the interactions that you have with him in the next game. Ultimately, in the grand scheme of the Legacy of Kain games, I don't really know what the point of Blood Omen 2 is. The stories told within the game are good, but I can't help but wonder if they would have been better told through dialogue in Defiance. Having a disoriented Kain trying to sort through the old and new memories of his life, having conflicting accounts for the characters he meets in Defiance could have been such an interesting consequence for messing with the timeline to the extent that he had. I also lament the idea that it might have freed up resources to make the sequel to Defiance that we all wanted, but I digress.
There were cities to be rebuilt, and order to be restored, and a new rule. My rule would then begin. To the victor go the spoils. At last, Nosgoth would be mine.
There is no such thing as true perfection. The concept itself is flawed. It's a lot like the concept of infinity. It's an all-encompassing term that definitionally has to contain its own antithesis within it. The perfection paradox states that perfection must contain flaws in order for it to progress. But this flies in the face of the completeness that a term like perfection seems to imply. Well, if they were alive today, Blood Omen 2 would be the imperfection that Empedocles would show Aristotle to prove the perfection of the Legacy of Kain series right before owning him on 200cc Rainbow Road. Probably. Blood Omen 2 is for the truly diehard Legacy of Kain fans, the people who cannot get enough of the wibbly wobbly sucky sucky that the game offers. This is still another chapter in the world of Nosgoth, which is just an infinitely intriguing fantasy world to live in. That's what makes the lackluster attempt to tell a story in the universe taste all the more bitter. If you wanted to make a generic fantasy game, why use the Legacy of Kain IP? Oh yeah, nah, never mind, because then no one would ever play this crap. As I've said, if you truly can't get enough of Kain and Nosgoth, then you can play through this. You'll facepalm, it will frustrate you, but you'll make it to the end. If that sounds as bad as I'm trying to portray it, then just read a synopsis on a wiki somewhere and go straight to Defiance. It's just a shame that someone managed to get their grubby hands on this IP and made what is essentially a vanity project. You can tell Amy Hennig didn't write this game, and Amy, if you're listening to this, please just finish the story of Legacy of Kain in book form or something. I'll even learn to read if that's what it takes. Thankfully, however, this game does no harm to the overall impression that the Legacy of Kain leaves on the history of video games. The story doesn't venture off so absurdly or create enough plot holes or dips in logic that it ruins the rest of the game. And to be perfectly honest, the story, even though the presentation of it isn't great, is one that does fit into the overall mythos and does have far-reaching consequences into both the past and future games. But Crystal Dynamics, if you're listening, the next time that you have a buggy, underdeveloped game that you don't think is going to sell well, don't drag my favorite IP into it, you sons of... So that was the Blood Omen 2 video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Like I said, we've set up our Discord server now, so if anyone wants to drop in, you can use the general chat to come by and say hello and all that good stuff. And there's also a dedicated Legacy of Kain channel up for the next couple of weeks so that people can just drop in and, you know, we can talk about our fan theories and just discuss the games, and just a little place where we can all nerd out over it while this series is still going on. If you made it to the end of the video, as always, you are an absolute champ and I appreciate you dearly. I hope to have the next video out quite soon where we're going to finally discuss Legacy of Kain Defiance, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a longer one, as we're going to go in depth into all of the complications and go right back to the first game if needs be to fully grasp the gravity of everything that happens in that game. So I hope that you look forward to it, and I hope that you'll drop by to watch it. As I said before, you can subscribe down below if you want to be notified when it comes out, and you can press the bell icon and you'll just... your phone will tell you. Your phone will tell you when I've finished bothering to make the video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and keep hacking away at that backlog. And then I go and spoil it all by doing something stupid like add tank controls.